Yeah.
Fire.
I think you said it was fire?
I assume.
Oh, I think it's a dust storm. I believe it's a dust storm. It's not going to smell.
Ooh, yeah, I didn't notice this.
Yeah, it's really actually I believe it or not was in Phoenix till late last night and I was driving back like, 3, 4 in the morning and it was very thick. You could see a storm. And coming from Phoenix all the way to here. And then today, loads of you put tefillin on today. Amazing. My son just started wearing tefillin yesterday. In Tenafly. I know that temple. That's Rabbi Shane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Felt like an issue.
It's not easy the first few days. Kind of.
The next day we walked to, the next day was Sabbath, and the day after, we walked to school for the session.
Amazing. He went to New York, so he went to the Rebbe's grave. That's somewhere that we pray at a lot. We go to, and then he also he went to the Rebbe's grave. He got a pair of tefillin. Started wearing tefillin every day. Mazel tov. I see he's got multiple tzitzis now, multiple pairs of tzitzis. Now that he found the right one.
The right.
And then, the one that you like.
No, it's ergonomics.
Is this the same brand? Same brand?
Yes,
Okay.
they have a green one, a black one, and I wore the black one every day. I was in New York, so they got a little.
Yeah, I guess I'll sweat
I
it.
need to get the laundry bag specifically, right?
Yeah, totally. All right, let's get started. And thank you, Adam. Last week he joined the Chai Club, right? He started tithing, so appreciate his tithe here. Able to pay the rent this month and whatever, hopefully all future months. Okay, let's get started. This is our last lesson. I just don't want to. I don't want to miss anyone from Zoom. This one is going to be. Actually, it starts with a video, so I'll text people during the video. Okay, so let's get started. We all, this is kind of funny. So this week's lesson is called Separation of Powers. Separation of Powers. Now, that word for many of us reminds us of probably our high school experience, right? We all learned about separation of powers in high school. Some of us remember what it is, some of us don't. It's definitely a hot concept in the news all the time of who's vetoing who. But this is kind of essential in high school civics, separation of powers. Some of us learned it then. Some of us heard about it and didn't learn it then. But we touched it. So we're going to go and discuss the separation of powers and how the Jewish kingdom worked. And we're going to see it's quite similar and what it means for us today. It's a very, very interesting lesson. And so I'm going to start right away with this video. And he's going to, I see they have a guy here who's the narrator. And I actually know him. And I'm happy he got this job because they had a different narrator a couple of years ago. And I didn't like him as much as this narrator. So.
He gets into John Block. So people, I mean, most people's mission are like, who's that? And so, but basically, he's the guy that really powered to get, the American Revolution.
Okay, so anyway, this is our Chabad rabbi. Does he look like a rabbi?
Is this like he's looking at you?
He's just a Christian.
I got
I
his
don't
music
think
here.
we're hearing.
I apologize about that. Someone joined Zoom and I didn't know how to. Do you still have the video there? Good idea? Bad idea? Okay. I know he has questions. We'll leave that for after. So in our book here, I'm not going to read through these texts now because we don't have time to read through every text, but a lot of times in the videos, I like to show you the relevant text so you can read them after. So text 1 is actually from the US Constitution. It's the 3 branches of government. And we saw the 3 branches there. They're over here, right? We have what we're trying to prevent is tyranny. And in order to do that, we have these 3 branches: legislative, the executive, and the judicial branch. Now, we quoted from Montesquieu: absolute power leads to tyranny. Absolute power leads to tyranny. And this is very much how the kingdoms and the monarchies were throughout history. You can see Montesquieu from 1748 on page 86 is text 2. And that is the separation of powers in the United States. Now, Montesquieu and the founding fathers in this class, they did not draw their views directly from Torah. Now, there is a book written by a fellow named Eric Nelson. It's a short book where he goes through actually the history of the Hebraists, and he argues that even more than this course, that certain ideas are based on Jewish laws. I don't remember the name of the book. It's on my phone, but his name is Eric Nelson. And if you put Jewish Commentary Magazine or something like that, you'll see his book. Now we'll see, they didn't draw their model directly from, Jewish tradition. However, there's a lot of similarities. And we're going to talk about what is similar and what is different. So for starters, we're going to go into Deuteronomy in the Torah. And this is text 3 on page 89. And Adam, you can read it. This is Deuteronomy, Torah. And this talks about how to set up the Jewish government once the Jewish people go and become sovereign over the Holy Land of Israel. Right? So Moses in Deuteronomy is conveying this in the name of God to the Jewish people.
The matter of judgment, matters of cities, shall rise and ascend to the place that the Lord your God chooses.
Just summarize here. So we have the first part, number one, it says to set up a judicial system. A judicial system. Now, the judicial system, recorded here in the Torah, is what's called, so in Judaism, you have what's called the executive power, which that's the Jewish king, which is mentioned here. And then there's the judicial system, which is the Sanhedrin. That's the first part. Now, for those who don't know, this is what the Torah says about the Sanhedrin. Number one, the Sanhedrin. Where is the Sanhedrin court located? Anyone know? Anyone follow? In the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. So it's in the Holy Temple of Jerusalem. They're sacrificing the animals. They have the priests and the Levites, and they're doing all the services in the Temple of Jerusalem. And over there, there's a room. And that room houses or holds these 71 judges. They're called the Sanhedrin. Now, interestingly, who is in the Sanhedrin? So the Torah records that the Sanhedrin has the Levites and regular Jews, who are the judges, worthy judges from all tribes. So that's what, now, here's the question. What about the king? So we'll just look at exercise 4.1. So who holds the judicial? So the Sanhedrin is in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Temple of Jerusalem, and the king is in fact excluded from the judicial system. He's not allowed even to sit in the Sanhedrin. Now, what if the king is really, really wise? The Talmud tells us that one of the greatest scholars at the time of King David was King David. King David was an amazing scholar. And the Talmud tells us not only was he an amazing scholar, but he was so amazing as a scholar, he was willing to be corrected. He was willing to be corrected. So, can a king sit on the judicial branch? Can a king sit in the Sanhedrin? So here we'll read text 4 from Maimonides. So, point number one, so why no king? Why no kings, right? Not no kings rally, but why no kings, right? The king's executive authority would undermine the independence of the judicial process. As we'll see, the Torah says to put a king, At the same time, if the king was a judge, what would happen? What would happen to the other rabbis if they disagreed with him? They were actually not allowed to openly disagree with him. That's forbidden. So by having the king in the judicial branch, that would cause that the final decision would not follow the majority. It would follow the king. It would follow the king. And therefore, the king is not allowed to be part of the Sanhedrin. In order that the judicial group can decide what the law of the Torah is, right? Because Jewish law is not decided by people. It's decided by the Torah. And the Jewish judges would be able to decide the law of the Torah without the pressure from the king. Now, after the Torah says to establish a judicial system, then the Torah says you can establish a king. It's actually very, very interesting. In Jewish history, the Torah says, if you want, you can have a king. Now, our first JLI course, I remember Esther was actually there many years ago in Yavpai College. We actually talked about King Saul and how King Saul, the Jewish people wanted a king, and Samuel was unhappy with their choice without wanting a king. And then finally, King David was chosen by God, and Samuel said, this is a good king. This is a good king. The king only comes around after the judicial system. And the reason is because in Jewish law, the king is not above the law. He's not above the law of the Torah. Now, there are certain things the Torah allows the king to get away with and do. However, that's the Torah allowing him, right? The Torah says, the king can have this or that, etc., can make this law. He does have executive power. The king does have executive power, and he can make executive decisions. However, he is not above the law of the Torah. And that's why the judicial system is set up first, and only after the king established. Now, the goal of this is, in order for the king to remember who's actually in charge. So who's actually in charge? God. And what does God want us to do? The Torah. He wants us to follow his Torah, his laws, right? So, which loving each other is one of the laws of the Torah. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to if God didn't say it in the Torah. So God wants the king to follow the Torah as well. Now, the goal of this is to remind the king that he is subject to law. We will see, actually, further in Maimonides, text 5.
Kings of the house of David. Testament.
So here you will have a king like King David. He's chosen by God, literally chosen by God to have executive power over his fellows. And then his son inherits the role, right? And his grandson inherits the role. They're so powerful. But at the same time, they are still, you can give testimony against them. They are still brought to judgment. The king is subject to court. Now, this is also, in the Torah, we find certain limitations on the king. Now, there's special mitzvahs for the king, and I'm going to share some of them. Number one, the Torah says it's a mitzvah for every Jewish person to write a Torah. Anyone here wrote a Torah before? The answer is a lot of people wrote a Torah. I'll explain why. Jewish law, every person is supposed to write a Torah. Now, in order to be a Torah, you have to be a special type of scribe. And with special training, done in a special way. Unfortunately, there's non-kosher scribes out there. So Jewish law, it's ruled that even if you write for one letter of a Torah, it's as if you wrote the whole Torah. Because if you are missing one letter in the Torah, the whole Torah is not kosher. So all you need to do is one letter. Furthermore, you don't have to write it. All you have to do is pay for someone to write it. Pay for someone to write it. So actually, we actually wrote a Torah a couple of years ago. Many of you were there when we finished writing the Torah. We wrote a Torah here in Prescott. And what we did is we sold letters. People could buy a letter in order to own a letter in the Torah, in order to make it as if the whole Torah was written for them and they could do that mitzvah. Now, the Rebbe this is actually really fascinating. In the 70s, the Rebbe started a campaign that every Jewish child should write a letter in the Torah, should buy a letter in the Torah. So there's an organization in Israel where every Jewish child can pay $1 and they write a letter on their behalf and they send them a certificate. Yesterday, they finished the 9th children Torah in Jerusalem. That's probably around 6 or 7 million children have had letters of the Torah since the campaign started. They made a huge celebration there, and it's a very special thing. If you don't have a letter in the Torah, you can go on Chabad.org and you can buy a letter on the Torah for $5 or $10, whatever it is. It's just a few dollars, and you can own a letter in the Torah. There are many, many Torahs written all the time. A lot of times, even when an individual person pays for a whole Torah to be written, they usually say, hey, anyone wants to join, give you can buy a letter or give a donation to the synagogue, whatever, and I'll sell you a letter. That way you can be part of this mitzvah. Now, every Jew is supposed to write a Torah. It could be one letter, but the king had an additional mitzvah. He had to write a Torah like every Jew, so he can join a Prescott community Torah. But he also had to have his own Torah that he wrote, the whole thing, and he never leaves his side. And this was a reminder that he is not above the law of the Torah. In fact, the Torah law is above him. So he would keep this Torah scroll with him. Furthermore, the Jewish kings are subject to court authority. They are not above the law. Jewish kings were not above the law. The Jewish kings who were above the law in the Bible were corrupt kings. But we all know King David was not above the law. And the Jewish kings and the Torah model are not above the law. Number 3, the Torah we read says that Jewish kings are not allowed to have too many wives. Now, in Jewish law, if a male could afford it in the Bible times, you can have up to 4 wives. Now, 1,000 years ago, Rabbeinu Gershon of Ashkenaz said Jewish people are no longer allowed to have more than one. Yes.
How many is too many?
I'll tell you in a second. Now, what is the idea of 4 wives in Jewish law? Jewish law is you can give each wife, if you could afford it, 1 week. 1 week of attention, right? That was the biblical law. Now, when the Jewish people were
For sure.
for a month. The problem was when Jewish people were exiled from Israel, Rabbeinu Gershon, who was one of the main rabbis in Germany, saw how Jews were taking advantage of this law. And for many reasons, he stopped it totally. Jewish males are only allowed to marry one lady, one wife. Sephardim never took it on, and then many years later they took it on because they saw the advantages. Now his reasoning was very simple. Number one, he said in the old country in Israel, if you have too many wives, your kids get kind of abandoned. It's kind of a mess. But the communities were close-knit, and they would take care of the kids. The communities would take care of the kids. Outside of Israel, your kids would get lost. Furthermore, he said there's many men who are going to cheat on their wives, and they're going to say, oh, this is my second wife, right? And he said, that's not the Jewish law. If you get married, you have the full responsibility of the Torah, that the Torah gives a lot of responsibility to be a husband. Number three, in Germany, it was forbidden to marry two wives, and he didn't want Jews to fight with the government and get in trouble. And there were many, many reasons for this. Ultimately, the main reason was because in Judaism, the maintenance of Judaism, the prime maintenance of continuity of Judaism is the Jewish home. The Jewish home. If you go to synagogue and you do not maintain a Jewish home, then your Judaism will only be once a week. And it will not continue generationally. It will die out eventually. Jewish home, if you keep a Jewish home, you know where Judaism gets involved in your home? Pretty much everywhere. So he saw that there's one husband and one wife, the Jewish home will be strong in exile. Okay, so that's regular people. So yes, you can't marry more than one wife nowadays. Can't marry more than one wife. Okay. How many are a king allowed to marry? Now, a king's very wealthy. He kind of doesn't have as much daily responsibility as regular human beings, financial responsibility. So a king is allowed to marry up to 18. However, King Solomon married, anyone know how many he married? 1,000. 1,000. Now, in Jewish law, it says King Solomon was not a crazy guy. King Solomon did it for several reasons. Number one, there were many poor people that he said if he marries them, even if he doesn't even see them, they'll be supported by the government. He'll be supporting many people just by marrying them. Number two, King Solomon in his era, many governments in the world wanted to convert to Judaism. So he married a lot of them to kind of make world peace. If two kingdoms marry, the Talmud says that even though King Solomon did not mean to break the law, he had good intentions, nonetheless he was punished. Because even if you have good intentions, you're not allowed to break the Jewish law. In other words, even if he had good intentions, he thought the Jewish law was just if you were marrying for fun, right? But ultimately, God punished him. There were many, many wives who came who were idolatrous, and they kind of had an effect on the household, and he was punished for it. Okay. Anyway, so a king is not allowed to marry too many wives, right? Also, we said he's not allowed to have too many horses. Too many horses. We read that in the Torah. And what's the reason for this? So ultimately, we're going to read from Rav Saadia Gaon. Rav Saadia Gaon is text 6. Anyone here heard of the Rav Saadia Gaon? Rav Saadia Gaon is a very, very interesting rabbi historically. He was a rabbi who was born in Egypt and Babylonia. He was a rabbi in the 9th century and 10th century. Very, very interesting rabbi. Now, it was right at the beginning of exile when Jews were finally pretty much kicked out of Israel, and many Jews were assimilating to the Muslim cultures. So he wrote a book called Emunas V'Deis. Now, I want to tell you how Jews assimilate. The way Jews assimilate to different cultures is different cultures say, hey, come on, we're basically the same thing. We both believe in God. We're basically the same thing, right? Slowly, that's how Jewish people assimilate. We have it nowadays also. People come and say, hey, we all believe in God. We're the same. So that was happening in Babylonia and the Middle East. So Rav Saadia Gaon wrote a book called Emunas V'Deis. Emunas V'Deis was one of the first Jewish philosophical books that were published. It was a book of philosophy explaining kind of the background and the context of the Torah in order that Jews would not associate their religion with other religions and mix up different values. So here we're going to read, this here explains why it's so hard to be a king. You can't marry so many wives, you can't have so many horses, you're not allowed to have too much money if you're a king, right? We're going to see why. Let's read text 6. So Prasad Yago, essentially explains that these laws, the kings, are kind of like checks and balances. We don't want it to get to his head so much. There's so many people in the world who are nice, humble people, and then they get a position of power, and the next thing they know, they become inflated. Next thing they know, they're telling experts that they're wrong. Next thing they know, they're telling God that he's wrong. And we didn't want, the purpose of the king was to represent God, not to go against God, right? So these are the laws. We want the king to remember that he's still under the law and he's still human. So unchecked power inflates the ego. This is from Rav Sadia Gaon. Yes.
So how many verses are there?
This is in Maimonides. I don't recall how many horses, but you can look it up in Maimonides. Maimonides talks about the laws of how many horses he's allowed to have and how much gold he's allowed to have. He's not allowed a limited amount of gold. Now, Rav Sadia Gaon explains that all these things are going to get to his head. So the wives, well, ultimately it's going to make him feel too powerful. He feels too powerful. Because again, the king does have executive power in Judaism. He's a king, he's royalty, and it stays in his bloodline. He's not elected, it's not a republic. Now in Judaism, we don't necessarily say monarchy is good for everybody. It's also really important to note. We have our mitzvah for the Torah for Jews in Israel, where God talks about monarchy. And there are even some opinions that say, not necessarily does God want us to even do it. If we want, we can do it. But we do not say that necessarily monarchy is best for the whole world. As Jewish people, we do believe that when the Mashiach comes, that will be a king, that will be a monarch, and that will be good for the whole world. That's a very specific king. Yes. Yes, sure.
Is there a parallel limit on territory to take over, for example?
Likely a lot of these things have to do if a king has a really good government and they have a lot of money in their storage, right? And it's used for the country, that's a good thing. That's good for the economy. We're talking about as the king gets to be the executive top guy, he does get certain luxuries, right? But the luxuries are limited. So it doesn't mean that he can't back his paper dollars with gold. That's a good thing. That's a good thing in the economy. I think it's good, right? The king is allowed to have as much crypto as he wants, though. Nah, I'm just kidding. Okay, so let's go further. So we talked about the executive branch, that's the king. And we talked about the judicial branch, that's the Sanhedrin. Now we're going to talk about something that's quite different than America, and that is the legislative branch, the legislative branch. Now, what is the legislative branch in Judaism? So, for starters, we'll get to Isaiah. Isaiah on text 7. All right, so here we have Isaiah, and he actually literally quotes Montesquieu, who was a scholar who came up with these branches. He says, the Lord is our judge, so that's the legislative branch, our judicial branch. The Lord is our lawgiver, that is the legislative. And the Lord is our king, that's the executive, right? He does all three. God is all three. Now, this is Isaiah saying that ultimately, the origin of Jewish law is very different than other laws. The origin of Jewish law is from God. Ultimately, a good king is one who follows the Torah, who's following God. A good judicial branch, the Sanhedrin, is following the Torah. They're following God. And the legislative is also from God. It's the Torah. Now, the Sanhedrin's job was to teach the laws of the Torah, and they were allowed to enact new laws in a certain context the Torah gives to protect the Torah. That was the job of Sanhedrin. So they could enact and say, everyone's doing blah, 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 so we're going to make a rule, no more doing this, because it's going to lead people to break the Torah, right? Those are called siyagim. Those are called the boundaries. I'll give you an example. In Jewish law, you're not allowed to play an instrument on Shabbat. Why are you not allowed to play an instrument on Shabbat? Anyone know why? It's very interesting. The reason is you're not allowed to put an instrument together. So technically speaking, if it was already put together, then you could play it. But they said you're not allowed to play an instrument, because I had played an instrument, you have to fix it a lot. You have to tune it. You have to put it together, right? Very rarely does someone have an instrument they don't have to tune or fix up or plug in or something like that. So the Sanhedrin ruled you are no longer allowed to play any instruments on Shabbat because they didn't want anyone to fix it. That you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. There was someone who once came to me and said, I play an instrument on Shabbat. I know you're not allowed to because you might fix it, but technically you're allowed to. So I told him, I said, no. You're not allowed to because you're for sure going to fix it. This is all if you were really, really observant and you make sure your instrument was all put together, then technically you could play it. But almost everyone who plays instruments nowadays, you got to tune it, you got to put the pieces together, switch the mouthpiece, etc., etc. These are all forbidden. Okay, so this is where Jewish law comes from. Now, this is Jewish law is from divine origin. God is represented by the king. He's represented by Sanhedrin, and he gives us the Torah. That's what's studied. So ultimately, God is behind it. This is obviously different than the United States Constitution. This is by the people, for the people. Now, to ensure that God remains the ultimate king, the Torah sets up the leadership of two things that we will see in text 8. So Levites in the olden days and Kohanim were not allowed to work. They're not meant to work. So who supports them? The people had to support them. People were taxed. You know what's interesting? As a Chabad rabbi, there were many Chabad rabbis who wanted to get a side job or a side business. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe did not allow them to. He said, no, you need to be supported by the people. The people need to know where they get divine knowledge from the rabbis, right? The people have to know that the rabbis have to be dedicated to studying and learning, and that's how the model was built in Chabad. So much so, there was even a guy in San Francisco, went to a bunch of Chabad rabbis, and he said, I have a business, you guys will all join, and you'll have franchise, and you'll do it while you're Chabad rabbi. And he wrote it to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, no, I want them to be involved with Kodesh. I want them to be involved with holy things, and people to know this is where we can get a presence of holiness. So the same thing with the Levites in the Torah. They were spiritual guys. They didn't work in toil. They worked in studying Torah and teaching Torah and doing the spiritual side of the nation. And that was what they were dedicated to. Now it's interesting, priesthood, Kohanim are the same thing. They are the servants of the spiritual servants of the nation. They're the go-between between people and God. They pray on behalf and they teach the people. Now, there were certain kings throughout history. There was King Yanai, and he actually tried to merge his kingdom, the executive branch, with the Kohen branch. And not only was it a disaster, it was wrong, but it brings corruption because the Levites are meant to stay purely dedicated to spirituality. That is the first protector that God put in place in order to make sure that the judicial system and the executive system are aligned with him himself. Now we have text 9, yes. They are born to the Levite family. They are born to the Levite family. Now, could a Levite go and try and make money in business? Yes, he could. But at that time, it was considered like the wrong thing to do. He has his family rights, and he should stick to his family rights, yes. I mean, I don't really have business interests. All my business things are So typically, I mean, there were exceptions the Rebbe made, but typically Chabad rabbis who have stores are typically Judaica stores. Restaurants are typically kosher restaurants. Now, I will just tell you, the Chabad rabbi you're referring to probably lost more money from his kosher restaurant than he gained. I will tell you, I know that perfectly. I know that, specifically. Now he has a system where it's somewhat lucrative, but for many years it was not. But he felt it was a responsibility to give people the opportunity to keep kosher. So most Chabad rabbi businesses, they're usually just keep investing and spreading Judaism. As a Chabad rabbi, if you have a good idea and it makes money, you know what you'll be able to do? You'll bring that idea to more people. That's what you'll be able to do. Like JLI, for example, there were some exceptions of rabbis, but generally the Rebbe wanted Chabads to be like successful businesses, but only because they're supporting a spiritual side. So for a Chabad rabbi to say like, yeah, I sell shmatas on the side, and I do use that money, or I sell real estate on the side in order to run my Jewish institution, that was typically looked down upon. But have there been rabbis who have bought a building and rented out places? Yeah, so they could afford to have a synagogue there in that building. They had to work out a way. So, anyways, that is point number one. You got the Levites. The Levites are representing the spiritual side of the Jewish people, and they're ones who are dedicated to spirituality. So hopefully they are going to check, and they're going to represent the legislative branch, God, and check and veto the executive power and the judicial power, make sure things are truly aligned with the Torah. Now we got another big one in text 9. Text 9 on page 96. So we have the idea of prophets. Now, prophets are a pretty awesome idea. In the times of the Torah, there were people who God spoke to. And if something went wrong, they would come and say, God told me to tell you there are going to be circumstances. The temple's going to be destroyed. There's going to be punishments. There's going to be rewards. And these were prophets. The prophets were able to come and go and say, hey, the king is acting off. We have so many prophets throughout the Torah. Now, after the temple was destroyed, it says prophets are very rare. But it's important to know that even though there may be an occasional prophet in the Jewish midst, Maimonides says sometimes we do have prophets. The prophets don't have a legal status of prophet. A legal status of prophet is if you don't listen to him, it could be death penalty. He's the word of God. Nowadays, if people would say a prophecy, they don't, because we don't have the temple in Jerusalem, they don't have that legal status. They're just good advice, good advice. So this is what kept the system in place. Now, it's important to remember that this is a religious government. So the purpose of these branches was not separation of powers because we were worried about concentrated power. Although there were times that it helped with that in Jewish history, that there were evil kings who were putting things out of whack. The purpose here was that everything should be aligned under God. You have God's divine will. God expresses what he wants in the Torah. The Torah is a book of what God wants us to do. That's all the Torah is, right? It's the instruction book of how to live. This is what God wants. And then you have these powers that work together in order to make sure that we are able to follow God's laws, to implement God's laws, and to have the knowledge of God's laws. All right, so that is how the Jewish system works. Any questions so far? All right, so let's talk about the First Amendment. Anyone know what the First Amendment was? Anyone know? Well, we know through history. We know that in history, in fact, the founding fathers and the American nation was trying to escape the monarchy, which had a lot of religious forces and persecution on them, right? So, in fact, in America, the Torah system of government was not really applicable. The Torah system of government is theocracy. It's designed for Jewish people in the Holy Land. So God says, you're my people, you follow my law, you follow my will, I want to keep you that way. You're going to have your king, you're going to have your laws, everything like that in your holy land. Now, non-Jews are not commanded to have that similar system. They're not commanded to have Jewish laws, as we spoke about in previous courses. And they have the Noahide laws, but the extent of the government and the Noahide laws is essentially to make sure that there's basic law and order. Now, American founding fathers were really wanted to just create a country that was not theocracy, that didn't have a religion that was enforced, didn't have a religion that was necessarily followed. Jewish people in Israel, our similarity is we are all Jews, and our government and everything is categorized under the same religion, and that's what we share, and that's what our country is based on. I want to mention in Israel, just shout out to Israel, pretty much every problem in the Israeli government is about this. Are we a Jewish country, or are we a country of Jews? Right? Are we a Jewish country or a country of Jews? Everything in Israel, for the last, going back even before the modern state of Israel, was always this debate. Are we a Jewish country or a country of Jews? There were those who said, we're Jews, so we got to follow the Torah, and we're a Jewish country. And there was those who said, no, we're a secular country that happens to have Jews. When I was in South America, in Venezuela, so you had all the synagogues, and then you had like the JCC, it was called Hebraica. And so people would say like, oh, the synagogue is a place for Jews, and Hebraica is a place that there happens to be Jews, right? There happens to be Jews. So now in America, unlike Israel, which Israel has this challenge, right? And every challenge in Israel goes down to that. In America, they said straight up, we are not any specific religion. We are not any specific religion. And that's where the First Amendment came in, freedom of religion. Establishment, the First Amendment prohibits establishment of official state religion, interference in religious freedom. So if you could read text 10 on page 98. Okay, so the First Amendment prohibits establish official state religion, interference in religious freedom. So simple reading is prohibits Congress from establishing an official state religion, that's the Establishment Clause, and prohibits Congress from interfering in people's freedom to practice their religion, the Free Exercise Clause. Now, this is quite narrow, but as time went on, different Supreme Courts, they kind of expanded the scope. After the amendment was ratified, Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter to the Danbury Baptist Association, that was a religious minority in Connecticut, who were afraid of the government's interference in their religion. At that time, the state of Connecticut still had an official state religion, the Congregational Church. So in response, Jefferson explained that the purpose of this is to create a wall of separation between church and state, that the government cannot mandate how the state's religion, how people's religion, cannot mandate how the church runs and how people's religious runs. Now, it's interesting because one of the fascinating things from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, where the Lubavitcher Rebbe argued a lot about this, was he said, as a result of this clause, a lot of times people limit religion in the United States, as opposed to the clauses actually to protect religion and say religion can't be mandated. Now, here is a talk from the Lubavitcher Rebbe in text 11. Yes, please. What? separation between church and state means, to a lot of people, is God cannot be mentioned in the state, which means God cannot be mentioned in any of the state institutions. Now, something the Rebbe pointed out in many contexts, as here in education, was in fact, the values, American values, are based on belief in God. Now, we just gave these 3 last lessons, and we talked about rights and liberty and equality, and this was all based in the belief in God of the founding fathers and the pilgrims. They felt that God is in charge and God gives us rights. Now, if you separate church and state, and that takes out God, that will only weaken these values. So that couldn't be the intention of the founding fathers. I'll give a couple examples. One of the most fascinating examples nowadays is the public menorah lighting. Now, of course, in Prescott, we light the menorah in the square, but in fact, it has a very, very interesting history. There was a book called The Secret of Chabad, and there's a chapter called Menorah Wars, and it's a fascinating chapter. Now, what happened was, Bill Graham, anyone heard of Bill Graham? The Grateful Dead? Okay, so he donated the first public menorah in Union Square in California. Rabbi Chaim Drizzen went to the city and said, "Can I put a menorah here and light it every night?" And they said yes. Anyways, a year later, it was totally fought by different Jewish organizations in the city. How could you put a menorah on city property? Anyways, they said, well, why not? Isn't there a separation of church and state? You're not allowed to put a menorah on state property, on government property. So for a year he took off, and the next year I think he put it up again. Meanwhile, I believe it was in Ohio, the same thing happened. Now, of course, it was leave it to the Jews. It was only Jewish organizations who fought against it. They said, we can't be so Jewish in public, and this is against separation between church and state. Now, the lawyer was named Nat Lewin. He's still alive today. He went and he fought in the Supreme Court. He was an Orthodox Jew under the guidance of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And what the Rebbe spoke about week after week then is he said, separation of church and state is not to take away God and take away religion. It's to make sure the government doesn't control religion. It doesn't mandate religion. It's to protect religion, not to protect the state, but it's to protect the religion. And therefore, lighting a menorah on state property does not mean the state is following religion. It means they are just acknowledging that the religion is practiced in their country. That's all they're doing. They're just acknowledging that. And there's no problem acknowledging religions if you have them in your country. There's a problem to mandate religion. And the Rebbe spoke about weeks and weeks, and we read one quote where essentially separation between church and state has not only not been followed, but it has been used against the purpose of it. It has mandated non-religion for people instead of allowing people to practice their religion. Now, the Rebbe felt that this is very, very dangerous. The first things were enacted was, when some of us were kids, there was prayer in school. There was daily prayer in school. Now, as prayer in school was not allowed because separation between church and state, crime went up, especially in New York. Now, why is that? Because values are based on God. And American values are also based on God. You can't be in denial of that, right? Liberty, equality, rights, they are based on God. American values are built on religious principles. So initially, the Rebbe spoke and he said, we need to have some sort of non-denominational prayer, some sort, because this is going to bring crime. Because if we spoke about it for all humankind, if we don't have some sort of prayer, we're going to forget that someone's watching, that there's right and wrong. What happens in many schools is children learn subjects, but they don't learn values. They don't learn values. They don't learn that there's a right or wrong, a good and bad, right? They don't learn that there's evil actions and good actions. They just learn methods of how to live life, which can be applied to any values. So after that, we spoke about it last course, and one of the lessons, the Rebbe introduced what was called the moment of silence. Now, the moment of silence in schools was that the Rebbe said we cannot do prayer because it's unconstitutional, cannot do prayer, and we cannot suggest any religion. However, we can give people a moment to focus, a moment of silence to focus on their values and their character, and that would bring growth. And here's text 12, back to the beginning, I think. Text 12, This is the Rebbe talking about a moment of silence. Now, Arizona did pass the moment of silence bill a couple years ago. Many states have passed it. Some states have not. It's still difficult for schools to apply it. But the idea was that people should bring back the idea that religion is a good thing. God is a good thing because God is very, very important. The founding fathers never imagined that people would use their values to say that there's no God and no higher power. So if you can read text 12.
The only way silence is
Different countries and different states, but there is a lot of data of positive statistics for different children and different groups in different neighborhoods. Now, part of the genius, as we mentioned, was not only the child should have the moment of silence, but he would have to come to the parents and say, what do I think? What's my religion? Or what are our beliefs? And that would awaken the parents' beliefs in God as well. This is also homework for us. The question is God in our home? Is God in our life? Can we add more God into our life? Well, the answer to that is for sure, because you can always add more God into your life. You can always pray to God more, do more mitzvahs, more charity, more kindness, more Torah study, more great blessings. This is something that we can do. Now, living in a relatively secular society, it's really important for us to know that if we made it here to this course, we're the ones who can change the trend. We can bring it to our home and thereby be an example to other homes and other lifestyles and spread God to the whole country. Now, this, of course, is really beautiful because ultimately it's constitutional and everyone is able to go and find it within themselves. So over the past 4 weeks, we discovered a lot of different Jewish ideas that align with American Declaration of Independence and the Founding Fathers. This should be a great source of pride for Jewish people. And we're going to conclude the course with an exercise to ask us to consider the topics of each of the lessons and find ways that we can strengthen it amongst our beliefs. So lesson 1 on exercise 4.2, the pilgrim's worldview was shaped by their biblical faith in God intimately being involved in the world. Inspired by the Jewish covenant with God at Mount Sinai, America's foundations were laid with a covenant, a commitment that require continual investment. We can live full and unapologetic lives in America and even leverage the American spirit to make Jewish life flourish like never before. So here we have, we're going to go through each lesson, but these are different ways. You don't have to write it down here. But we spoke about in the first lesson how aligned Judaism is with the belief in the founding fathers. We said, furthermore, America lets us be more outspoken about our Judaism than ever before. In old countries, Jews always had to hide their identity. But in America, we have the ability to be extra proud. So we want to suggest that everyone tries to integrate that in their life. Lesson 2, we spoke about the fundamental principle that all men are created equal by their Creator, and they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights. This is a radical Jewish innovation. With being created in God's image is also profound duty that generates immense responsibilities. So we want to challenge everyone to integrate these in their life. Lesson 3, last week we spoke about the American dream and how of personal prosperity and home ownership that was inspired by the Jubilee system. We also spoke about how in God we trust reminds us that our business affairs are ultimately guided by God's involvement. So how can we integrate that? That's hopefully, it's the end of a course, and it's always sad to end a course, but hopefully we'll integrate these ideas, hold us out to the next course. And finally, lesson 4, the Torah has its own system of separation between different branches of power, but its focus is on maintaining loyalty to God, the ultimate source of authority. So how can we integrate those Jewish principles into our life? And that's the homework for today. We're going to watch the final summary video. Just sorry about that. All right. Well, here's next. This is next year's 3 courses. Just want to mention them. I didn't. You can already see some information. So God willing, we're getting new chairs. We have 37 sponsored. If you want to sponsor more, they're available. We'll hopefully get them before the holidays. And I want to thank everybody for coming. And if you have any questions, now's your time. Let me just, all right, give me a second. Yes. Question. I don't really know exactly how Sharia law is being implemented in the States. I think your question might be, I mean, I don't know much about that. There is a famous Chabad lawyer who has fought in many states. I think his name is David Yerushalmi. But I will tell you like this. Second, just a comment. I'll get to Zoom soon if people on Zoom have questions. I will tell you like this. Oh, wow. 270s. Wow, pretty cool. I'll look at it. Actually, points, like, first point collection. I don't have it here, but my parents still have it. Okay, so let me just make a couple points. It is very, very interesting. There's a very interesting question that people have. So the first year I put up a menorah in the square, and I saw in the Prescott Courier there was an article for menorah lighting in the square. And someone said, well, why can't we put this religion in the square? Why can't we put that religion in the square? Why can't we put satanic things in the square? And someone answered in the comments, and they said, you can. Go for it. You can do it. You can do it. You can't force anyone to follow that religion, but you can put it there to represent your religion. Now, it is notable, one point that people say, really gets into another philosophical question that people have. And I'm going to just touch upon it. It's a very philosophical question. It might trigger a bunch of people. But let's say someone does come, and they're a terrorist, and they come and they say, God told me to murder you. Are they telling the truth? Well, the truth is you can't disprove them. They might be telling the truth. But what I would probably tell them in this, I would say, like, God told you to murder me. God told me to defend myself. So if God wants me to be murdered and to submit myself, he should probably communicate that to me, because in the Torah, he said the opposite, and he should probably communicate that. So it's important to remember that in the United States, they did believe in God. They wanted to find they had certain values that they felt all humanity would have those values and believe in that God, right? And we can't take God out of society, because if we take God out of society, it will fall apart. It will implode, right? At the same time, we can't enforce religion in the United States. So it's a tricky path, right? Because we want to welcome every religion. But on the other hand, the founding fathers believed that all humans are created equal. And if your religion causes you to hurt somebody else, then that wouldn't be a compatible religion with the Constitution. So this is something really important. On one hand, the United States is based on the belief in God. Now, let's say you don't believe in God. Can you live in the United States? Well, the answer is, so as long as you're respecting the founders who believed in God, you can. But you cannot deny that the United States was not created based on the belief in God. That's historically accurate. So let's say you don't believe in God, and therefore you don't believe that all humans are created equal, and therefore you're allowed to hurt another human being. That's okay. But you should probably find another country that allows that, because this country is based on certain godly truths and godly values. Now, in the United States, they understood that not everybody agrees with those values. So they gave the option to live wherever you want under those values. So when it comes to different laws in the United States, so as long as they can be compatible with the values of the founding fathers, they can work in this country. But as long as they're not compatible, so people feel like, well, this is a free country, you can do whatever you want. But it's not that free. If you want to live in a free country where you could do whatever you want, you can move to Ashfork. Now, you can move to a country which allows that. If there is no country in the world, you can move to Mars, right? But ultimately, the United States is based on godly values. So, so Judaism is actually very interesting historically. Most people do not know the history of Judaism in the world and in America. But in Jewish history, you have basically 3,000 years, over 3,000 years of unbroken tradition. Now, there were different traditions, but they were all in the scope. It's like the king wasn't a regular citizen. He had much more luxury, different laws than everybody else. There are different laws that apply to the king, but the king is under Torah laws, right? So Judaism, there's in Jewish history, you have what's called halachic Judaism. It follows Jewish law. All Jews kept halachic Judaism till the Renaissance in Europe, right? So when it comes to Judaism, I think it's really important that Jews remember that if I do not follow halachic Judaism, let's say, I'm not doing the same Judaism as my ancestors. My ancestors wouldn't recognize that Judaism. Now, it's important to recognize that because it's honest. It's honest. So in Jewish law and in Jewish tradition, there is a vast amount of discussion everywhere what's allowed for a Jew and what's not allowed for a Jew. Now, I've mentioned this many times that when somebody breaks Jewish law, it is very, very important to say, I broke Jewish law. I didn't change Jewish law because Jewish law does not belong to me to change. It belongs to God. So I didn't change Jewish law. I made a different type of law, which I want to call Jewish, but I didn't change Jewish law. Now, this is very important historically. Yeah. 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 So this is the study tour. Study tour is very vast. And actually what tradition is. I'll give you an example. It is a law that you got to eat handmade matzah on Passover. It is a tradition to eat matzah balls on Pesach, a matzah ball, right? Now, if you don't eat, now what might happen is you might eat a non-kosher matzah ball, right? And that matzah ball, it is a law that you can't eat it, right? But you didn't really do a tradition because tradition has its context. So I think it's part of a larger question, understanding what's law, what's tradition, how Judaism works. That could be another course, a whole another course. But in America, there isn't really any mandated type of Judaism in America. In other countries like in South Africa, Australia, England, they have government recognized Judaism. Any type of practice under that is perhaps different religion, not under that is different religion. But in America, there isn't any mandated Judaism by the government, which is like recognize this is the Judaism. In America, anyone can call themselves a rabbi, can say this is law, and nobody can. Israel is very tricky. So Israel basically, it has to do with what we spoke about before. See, Israel, before the state of Israel, they had what was called the Rabbanut. The Rabbanut was the rabbis who enforced Jewish law. Now, they didn't force people to keep Jewish law, but if you wanted to be recognized as Jewish law, they were the ones who verified what Jewish law is. So in Israel, if you want to get married, you have to get married by an Orthodox. Now, after the state of Israel was founded, a lot of these rabbis said, hey, we were here long before you. We were doing this for years. So they were recognized by the government. Now, this is a really big source of politics in Israel because Israel wants to be a republic and democratic country, but at the same time, they're a Jewish country. So at this point right now, the Rabbanut is in charge of many things in Israel. So if you go and you say, hey, I call this kosher, they're going to be after you. They might even sue you in the court of law. If you get married in Israel, it's going to have to be by an Orthodox rabbi. Correct. Correct. So now this is where you have a lot of strife in Israel. Some say, well, these are the rabbis. This is the way they've always been doing it. Who gives us the right to change it? Others say, well, no, we're a democratic country. We can cancel these rabbis. And that causes a lot of strife because a lot of the country says, no, we're Jewish. We want to adhere to. Now, most Jews in Israel, so in Israel, you have very little reform and conservative movement. Most Jews in Israel are non-religious, or actually, I don't know, we're probably getting about 50-50. But most Jews are secular. Most are Orthodox. The ones who are non-Orthodox in Israel are not Reformed. They don't practice Orthodox, right? So when they do practice, they practice Orthodox, right? That's the way they're wired. In other words, they say, this is the Judaism we don't follow. Well, so that they're valued. Maybe they might say they don't believe in tradition. They don't believe. But when we do Judaism, this is what we do. So let's say I'll give you an example. In Israel, on Yom Kippur, many Jews go to synagogue. That's the only day they go in the year. They go to a fully religious synagogue, and there's quite a low percentage of people who don't go the fully religious, option on Yom Kippur. So Israel has that. It's kind of a unique wiring. There's several countries in the world like that.
That's not my experience from living in Israel.
I'm not speaking experiences
who were not Orthodox, and they did have their own ways of doing things.
I'm talking statistics and data. So I can speak experience. I'm speaking statistics and data. Very few, and they're very few. And if you speak to most Israelis, they don't affiliate with that. A lot of them don't affiliate with anything. I mean, Jews are famous for being atheists and things like that, but they'll be like, "This is the Judaism I don't believe in." It's an interesting build-up in Israeli wiring, and you have the same thing in Russia and Australia as well. Yes. Well, so in Israel, so that if I'm going to do something, or I'm not going to do something, that's what I'm not going to do. So that is how. Now, again, these are like long philosophical discussions. At Chabad, obviously, we believe in the authentic ancient traditions of Judaism, and we believe every Jew should embrace them. And I always tell people that, if you come here on a Saturday or anytime, there's so many Jews who are so non-religious. But I always tell them, extremely non-religious. And I always tell them, what you do fully. Do what your grandfather did one time a week. And that's why Chabad is so into tefillin and so into doing action-based mitzvahs. Because action-based mitzvahs, the way the Torah is wired, is really, really interesting, actually. Throughout history, philosophy of Torah always changed. And a lot of times philosophy aligns with modern day values. And that's why it changes, because values change from us to our children. But Torah is action-based, because when it comes to philosophy, you can talk and say, hey, I thought the tefillin, I'm reading, thinking, meditating. But when it comes to action, either you did it or you didn't do it. You did the right side, you did it or you didn't do it. So Judaism, because Judaism is so action-based, it preserved our values for so many years. And ultimately, that's why in the Talmud and the Jewish law, it says, Hamaseh hu ha'ikar. Action is the main thing. Because if you talk about the story of Hanukkah, and it is totally relating to modern war in Ukraine and Russia, let's say, and you're saying this is what Hanukkah is about, then you can pretty much guarantee when that war is over, or your grandkids are not going to know what Hanukkah is. But if you light the menorah and you do it right, it doesn't matter what you say. They're going to say, this is what my ancestors did. This is what my parents did. Now, if you get a menorah and it is not a kosher menorah, for example, it's a light bulb menorah, or it's a menorah which is in a circle, or it's on different levels, you can pretty much guarantee that your grandchildren's menorah is going to outdo your menorah in creativity and funkiness. So that's why adhering to the Jewish rituals is actually a tremendous gift that God gave us to preserve his will and preserve continuity in Judaism. And it's humbling because, it's very humbling because we suddenly realize that we're just like this little link in this chain. And even if you don't have children, you're a link in this chain, and you're just bringing the tradition to the next generation. And when you don't do that, you realize, it just kind of dissolves. Anyways, thank you very much for coming. God bless America. God bless the Jewish people. And the main thing is that we should all be proud Jews and bring the coming of Mashiach. Thank you very much for coming. Okay, I got to go off Zoom. Any questions could be